Hi, everyone. This is Sonal. Welcome to the a16z podcast. I'm here today with Tim Schafer of Double Fine Productions. Tim is the CEO and co-founder of Double Fine, which just put out Broken Age, which was a massively crowdfunded game on Kickstarter.
Massively crowdfunded. I like that.
It was. Wasn't it like the first $1 million game or something like that?
It was like, what are the things that we had records in? We had like the most
backers.
Most backers. It was like fastest to
$2 million.
And it was like most exciting thing that happened ever. Also. At least as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and the way I know you is as the inventor of Grim Fandango, which is aging myself, but that's what I know about you in the gaming space.
It's really recent. We just remastered it.
Okay, and I'm here with Justin, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the COO of Double Fine.
Hello.
And I'm here with Herman Narula, the CEO of Improbable, that, full disclosure, we're investors in. Hi, Herman.
Hello.
We thought it'd be great to do a podcast on trends in gaming. So we just want to let you guys talk, and let's start off by just talking about the funding landscape, because I think that's one of the first things that comes to mind.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, people often ask, like, what are you excited about in games, and like what technology, like any of these new devices, and there are a lot of new things going on, VR and stuff. But lately I've been most excited by how things have changed as far as business goes, which sounds weird because I've always been on the creative side of things. But what happened with us in crowdfunding has allowed us to have just so much more creative control and a more natural relationship with people who we make games for, because they're funding our games and we're directly in contact with them. They really feel like they're participating in making the game because they help fund it, and they're big champions of the game, and they get to see behind the curtain a little bit. So it's really changed compared to the old days where we would have to deal with a large gatekeeper, a large company who was like just trying to avoid risk and trying to change our games creatively, and now we're much more in control of that. So I guess that's the thing going on in games. It's strange that the funding kind of revolution that's been going on has been having a huge impact on creativity.
I think it's had a huge impact on the technology side as well. For us, for example, working with game developers, we're increasingly interested in working with independent game developers because they have such huge followings distinct from large businesses, and they have an ability. I mean, like Dean Hall, for example, who we're working with, they have an ability to command a following and monetize that following in a way that previously they would have had to have gone through a big publisher to do. I mean, that's profound. And I think technological innovation that makes games easier to build or quicker to build or widens the scope of what small teams can do may be quite important in the near future.
Yeah, and I see a historical precedent actually being set here. If you actually look at what happened 40 years ago in films, you actually see film financing came about then, and the creators were freed from a studio framework. And it's really interesting to see what's actually happening right now with crowdfunding and other funding sources in games, because it's creating those same dynamics that led to basically a creative explosion.
And how is it different from the music industry? Because a lot of people have a lot of like PTSD from the music industry. Like they come out, they start. You have to have it almost seems like a precondition is you have to have your own following to really do indie games successfully. Like, is that true? Can people really become successful if they don't already have their following?
I mean, it's happened,
following.
right?
Yeah, I mean, that's how
it happens
these
all
things,
the time.
Yeah, just like a really great game can grab everyone's attention. That or sometimes just a shot of a game like Hyper Light Drifter or something I've never seen before. I didn't know the team, never heard of these guys. Just like, what is that? I want to see that. I want to back that. And in my case, having many years of experience and years to like generate that kind of following definitely helped have a really big Kickstarter. But not everyone needs to have 3.3 million right off the bat in their first game, right? So I think it's a great natural self-correcting method to actually build that kind of following.
And yet I do think that it is a little bit of a myth that like with crowdfunding, a lot of people think that if you go there, with the current platforms that are in place, that organic discovery is fairly large. And we've actually found that to be quite to the contrary. And you do need to come with your community. A lot of the platforms that exist today are about organizing your community around a single funding event. The other thing is, it's interesting to note, if you're actually looking at the landscape, the barriers to entry have like just come down, which is great, but there's actually more access to more people than ever before. And so there's like a new barrier that has come about, which is discovery. And it's very hard when you're an indie and you're very talented to get discovered these days.
It almost suggests a new model for the publisher, like following on from what you were saying. I mean, where the real role is around discovery, it's around aiding community interaction, it's around magnifying what independents like yourself are already doing for new talent, as opposed to being this kind of controlling influence that sort of swallow up the studio.
I mean, I would agree. Like, if you go back to that 40 years ago, that actually was right around the time when EA was being formed. You had Trip Hawkins, and he went out and he found, and this actually ties in the music industry, like, he got the contract from the music industry and used the same practices, which have been business practices established for the last 40 years in the game industry. That was the same time, by the way, that the film financing piece was happening. And so you kind of saw the creatives in the game industry potentially being more restricted, and those restrictions are falling away now. Where the film industry, you've seen, the term auteur came from that time frame, and a lot of the most dominant franchises and the creatives being in control now of the studio framework really has come about from that time.
So walk us down a little bit more to why this really matters for people who aren't inside the gaming industry. Like, what does it mean when you give power back to the creators?
Definitely something you should answer.
I mean, I think it leads to the best work, and I think the health of the industry. Like, you look at something like Sundance Film Festival, and it's not like Sundance appeared and crushed all the studios and destroyed Hollywood forever. It actually just enriched the whole ecosystem. So, you had a new place to discover up and coming artists or returning artists, but different kinds of movies were shown there. And those people could also work in Hollywood and kind of just add new ideas to it. In the same way the indie game market, I think, might make smaller games than the AAA developers, but they're kind of going out in the direction of new genres and new ideas. Like, there was no, I don't think a AAA studio would have created Minecraft, for example, and I don't think that followed any sort of rules that existed before it, but I think when people have the ability to kind of make these smaller, personal, more risky projects, just it opens up, it continues to grow. The creativity, I think, always leads, and then the players follow, and then people with money see that, wow, hey, look, everyone's going over there, and wants to help that grow even bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's almost like a kind of Cambrian explosion of new possibilities and ideas. I mean, the one thing as a gamer, as a big fan of some of your games as well, that I've really, hated in the last few years has been the sameness and lack of risk around so many of the higher budget productions that are out there. I mean, still deeply entertaining and fun, but the interesting thing about this industry is you don't really grow out of it. The average age is what, like 36 now of a gamer? Mm-hmm. So these are the same eyeballs. And, there's something weird happening here where they want more variety. So I think there's quite a voracious appetite out there for the new plethora of perhaps less risky independent projects, or more risky creatively, less risky financially now, that are going to be available. Mm-hmm. I'm curious also on your thoughts, Tim, on whether you feel that the mobile user base, the kind of new generation gamers who maybe were never part of the last 20 years of gaming history, are they going to be fundamentally different in what they want from the current, like, more insular gaming community, or are they going to be the same?
I mean, I hope so. I hope they're different in that I think a lot of people had an idea that gamers means a certain thing. Just because it's been that way for a long time. And I think the new people who've been brought in the market are showing something that it kind of highlights the difference to me between games and movies. When you go to a multiplex, there's a movie for everybody. There's like a movie your parents will go see, there's a movie the kids will go see, there's a movie the teenagers will go see, and there's comedies and dramas, and they're still pretty mainstream, right? It's not like you don't have to go to an art house to see that sort of variety. But in games, in mainstream games, you still have, for the majority sense, like, summer action blockbusters. They're mostly all in that genre, if and I think indie games kind of stretched out of that for sure. But just the idea that people, the idea of a comedy, that's not a big common thing you see in games, like a comedy game.
Exactly.
And definitely not a romance. It's not a very common thing. They exist, but they're not that common. I think that shows that when new people come in through casual gaming or mobile gaming, they don't have those same assumptions that everybody wants to play a certain type of game, and I think it's kind of rough sometimes for the people who are in that existing community to feel it changing and feeling like new people are joining the club. And I think it makes them kind of angry sometimes, but I think in general it'll just keep growing, and that's healthy for everybody.
Completely, and I agree. I also think it's kind of a gateway drug. I think that people playing Clash of Clans today, even Clash of Clans, is more sophisticated than mobile experiences that came before. I mean, I remember Snake. I don't know if anyone else does back in the day, right? Yeah. When they want more, what do? And we had a very interesting little anecdotal story. A lot of people had previously played mobile games, And one of the requirements was to download the game from Steam in order to interact with it. These weren't like hardcore gamers. And just the click process in Steam was utterly alien to them. I mean, these are people that have used the iPhone store, right? So they were really used to a very slick experience. They were instantly like thrown by trying to interact with this game. It was like an alien world to them, like people who used to Amazon or iTunes. So there's a sort of adolescence to some of the non-creative parts of the industry, which needs to evolve if those people are to be brought into the fold.
What are some of the other changes besides mobile that are changing the gaming landscape for you guys as creators and producers of games?
I think like that diversity of people trying new things, I think is changing a lot. People realizing that it's okay to have narrative in games again. I think for years, when I first started playing, it was like text adventures. I love playing these games that would tell you you're in the middle of a field, there's a White House to the north, these text event, you type in, go north. We made adventure games all through the 90s that were all about pirates and bikers and tentacles and all sorts of stories. And I think then within the gaming community, there was a feeling of like, we should do these non-scripted things that are just systemic based, where you make your own story by finding these emergent type behaviors, and kind of scripted stories were had a bad rap for a while. And I think things like The Last of Us and Home Alone and games have come out where story is so strong, and people are realizing that you can have both. You can have both emergent things happening in games. You can have games across a whole spectrum of really scripted story-based things to really just emergent type Minecraft things. And now they're doing a story-based version of Minecraft. So it's like everywhere in between. It's just basically safe. I think it's safe to explore the whole spectrum now, which I think is a positive step.
I mean, our passion, like full disclosure, is in building massive emergent online experiences, right? And it's funny that you mentioned that, it's okay to tell stories again. I think going even further, I think people who play online games in those communities, they want to tell stories and be part of stories. There can be a very samey quality to online experiences. You play something like Grim Fandango and you go on an emotional journey, right? You don't with a game where all the content is static. So how to bring the teeming mass of online gamers to the same kind of emotional experiences that they get from really good single-player experiences is a really hard challenge too. And I think the focus on VR and graphics, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think that graphics are not the be-all and end-all of gaming experience. I think there's more fundamental components to engagement that I wish people would explore more, which aren't as flashy as just increasing pixel density. And I mean, it's why people like Tim and others are so enduring in their ability to produce great games. There must be something fundamental that crosses medium, that crosses audience, which needs to be explored.
Yeah, and I think it was what Tim was talking about too, is the story side of things. And one thing I think is interesting that's going to happen here is you have, we talked about mobile, but VR, which you were just alluding to. And what that does to the gaming landscape, which I'm really excited about, because a lot of the same things that actually worked and the same techniques and with Hollywood films and these big blockbuster games, they just don't translate over to the VR experience, which I think potentially you'll see a spotlight on things like narrative and exploration, which do translate to that medium. And I think it's something interesting to hear, what Tim's take on it is.
Well, I think it's interesting because I guess beyond story and gameplay, all these things to me are part of this toolkit to do one thing, which is the thing I like to do most in games, which is just pull someone into a world. Just pull someone until they forget they're sitting on the couch or wherever they are, and they're just in this world. The characters feel real to them. The problems of the world become their problems, and the beauty of the world. They feel like they're just transported into it. They never want to leave. I mean, they want them to leave and go have dinner and stuff like that, but they miss it. That feeling when you're playing a really great game and you're at school or work and you're just, I can't wait to go back to that world. It's so fun because I feel like. There is something really positive about just going to a fantasy world and getting lost in that. It's like a mental transformation. And I think, VR just has a lot of potential, obviously, for making you feel like you're in another place, but you were physically in another place and you're really, really there. And there's a lot of potential for that, for sure.
It's kind of interesting, too, because you were talking about, the gateway drug, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, is VR, the farthest you can get away from the gateway drug? Because you're strapping something on your head.
See, that's really, really interesting. I completely agree. I think deepening the experience in other ways is important. But I think that the fundamental threshold is, those things are all periphery, they're very important, but the fundamental threshold is, am I engaged with what I'm interacting with? Am I emotionally, personally, mentally engaged? And that boils down to, in my view, it's just my opinion, on what that content is and what the fundamentals of that experience are. And I think when people try and paper that over with better graphics or with something superficially more immersive, they can't fix that flaw. And that, I think, to really explore what will work in new mediums requires exactly what you guys are talking about, way more experimentation, which is in turn enabled by better funding models and more more people trying new things. And you're right. The old stuff won't work. Even in online, like look at DayZ. I mean, that was what the hell was that, right? That was a whole new experience. I mean,
that's another thing I just love on the business side. So a little bit of a tangent here, but if you went to Steam, which you talked about earlier, and how so DayZ is probably one of those properties that's performed really well on Steam. It's a little inaccessible to most people, but if you went onto that place to buy it, you actually saw the description that was like on all caps that looked like lawyer speak, which is basically do not buy this game. Like it's buggy, it's not finished, it's unpolished. Like don't get involved.
So they did incredibly well in the Steam sale.
No, they did something that's never happened.
They weren't even on sale.
Yeah.
Like it's got a really strange word of mouth.
There was something that's never happened in the history of the Steam sale, which was it was the holiday side. It was like the Christmas sale.
Yeah.
And for the whole sale, they stayed at the number one spot.
Yeah, this is what he was telling us. I mean, like, so working with him now, and like one of the interesting points about that game is what was it that kept people there? Like the Arma engine, he'd be the first to say wouldn't have been necessarily his first choice. Like, and the development methodology of the game and kind of from a bug and development perspective, it was a challenging project to do.
So, I mean,
but it was unbelievably engaging, right?
Yeah,
like,
and there's something really cool there, which is which I'm still trying to figure out from just a business side of like opportunities and stuff. But if you look at Dota, it was basically a mod as well, which became League of Legends. And you look at this from Arma, this is like DayZ. It's like this mod community that grabs something and makes it something bigger. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd agree totally. I mean, we started. I don't know what you feel about this, Tim, but we started this sort of radical paradigm internally, which is we think for now, like all the development teams experimenting with us, they're all modding versions of code bases that made up earlier games built on Improbable. So our whole tech is based around the idea that there's not really any difference between a game developer and a modder. They're both manipulating a shared code base that they can keep adding to. So you get these really strange variations of products that are in development that just kind of spin out in our team. Everyone's always game jamming and riffing on what's being built.
Well, it's also like they can actually take a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
The modders can.
Because it's so easy to build something. Yeah.
And they're not tied to a commercial model, and it's like it's not the same publishing model where it's like they can't take risks. They have to sit there and plug the same franchise. They have to do proven mechanics.
And the expectations are different too. If Ubisoft had come out and released DayZ and been like, here it is, people would have treated them, I think, differently.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
But it was like it shows how. I mean, modding is a great example of putting tools in the hands of a lot of people, and shows how the next great idea. It's really hard to ensure that it's in the right place, like in your company. Mm-hmm. It's like it might be out in the wild somewhere, and whoever made the right mod to that game, and all of a sudden created a new genre, like they did with
completely
and Defenders of the Age.
And the core risk of imagine that game, you die and you're permanently dead. And when you meet people, there's this choice. I mean, you see people streaming reaction shots of experiences they've had in the game. These are real experiences.
I mean, they created a game, right? Yeah, it created things in the players that they wanted to talk about completely, which I think is how things get promoted these days. It's just everyone talking about it. Kind of, it used to be called water coolers, but I think it's obviously just YouTube streams.
Exactly. I mean, it left an effect on you, and it was an effect that was yours and unique. I remember. I was one of those bad people that I'm going to confess that I played DayZ and I
force-fed rotten meat to people.
It's not quite like that. I mean, I was actually helped by this nice group of people, and I just decided their stuff looked really shiny, and the game is quite laborious. So I brutally murdered them with a shovel, right? And
it was. Good to know.
However, it was like I thought it would just be a game, and like who cares, right? But at the end of that experience, you actually felt awful, like absolutely awful. And there were these people that are like, "Why? We helped you. Like, why have you done this?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know." You don't get that, in an experience which is cookie cutter or where, the player engagement and that core, your choices are not being valued,
It sounds really bad, but I feel like that's one of the valuable things about games that people don't talk about a lot, which is experimenting with morality and behavior, like little kids do. Like you're playing games and you do something mean to someone and then you're like, I didn't like how that felt. I felt weird when they asked me why I did that. I think it's really great that kids play these games and they role play emotional situations or moral situations, and they test out how it feels to misbehave or be bad or be the bad guy, and they kind of make a choice if they liked it or they didn't like it. I don't know if you'd be more likely to steal someone's food in the future.
No, believe me. I mean, after seeing what a shovel murder really looks like, I'm off them for life. It's not going to be any of those.
So let's talk a little bit more about this element of moral and ethical components to gaming. I think that's actually really interesting, and we should pull on that thread a little bit more.
Moral choices, any choice, right? Like the question is, are they authentic choices? most games don't. I mean, many games don't give people authentic choices. The ones that are authentic are the ones that they want to really.
They give
interact
this
with.
really obvious choice of like, you found a puppy. Do you kill it?
or-
or do you harvest it for its blood, or do you raise it so it becomes the king of all puppies?
Yeah, and one choice is always like, this is definitely better, like
Yeah.
in every way. And oh, by the way, please click this button here. Yeah.
But I think, it's not about the games preaching a certain moral tone
Yeah.
to the players. It's
Right.
about if you provide that kind of either sandbox or a structured experience, you can let them play. Like I was saying, little kids when they play cops and robbers or any sort of like pretend role playing the kids do, is them exploring. What is it like for me to be a powerful character or a weaker character or just someone in a certain situation I can't be in real life? And then what would I do if I was that? If I was invisible or could fly? Like, what would I use it for good? And let me try using it for bad. And like it's great that kids can try out these things. Like I have a daughter, and she just turned 7, and sometimes I hear her being mean to her dolls, and I used to be like, "Are you crazy? Are you going to be like an evil villain when you grow up?" And I can tell that she is just like exploring things that are hard to do in real life. Like you don't want to actually be mean to people or. But she's interested in the range of, what happens if you try these things. And I think when kids play with dolls, that they figure out through role playing what it feels like, and they get this kind of emotional practice. And I think all sorts of play does this, including video games. And video games can just do it in a way that is really interesting and has a whole bunch of new potential.
And anything that we can do as technologists or developers to try and help people make and create more authentic choices and options in games is important, right? Like if you're really going to rob someone, there should be a reaction in the world. If you're, there should be consequences to your actions. And at least in the online game space, that's, I guess, my main preoccupation, trying to make that more possible.
Because you did benefit by shoveling those people, right? You got stuff.
Yeah, but also
and
it
the
was
game
a-
didn't tell you right or wrong. The game didn't be like, oh, you horrible
No,
person.
it didn't. And but it was a real thought. I probably thought about that choice in that game more than I think any choice I've thought about in any game I've ever made since then. And it's an experience that was entirely uniquely mine. And when I went and talked to people about it, they had their own advice, but they didn't have the exact same choice, right? It was
Right.
like it was a unique moment.
Yeah, that's one of those like Minecraft things too that came up with Minecraft. It's like that first night you have to build
Yeah.
a structure and then the zombies come out.
Exactly.
And like that was the first experience people had. It's like, well, what was that like that first night for you?
Yeah, exactly. But and then and it would have been slightly different each time depending upon where they were.
Right.
So for me, that's it. I think that
Yeah.
the magic future is one where we can do exactly what Tim says, right? Which is have a world where you're exploring authentic choices, be they moral or otherwise, and whatever it takes to make those choices more authentic. If it's putting on a VR headset, or if it's being in a simulated online world, or if it's just having a really cracking good story. Have you ever considered like a system-based game or more like online or something?
Yeah.
Scope
a lot.
wise.
I mean, especially after making an adventure game, I was kind of like, oh, now I remember why I stopped making those. Those are so hard to make because everything is a one-off single use thing. You work for 3 months on something, it'll take the player 10 minutes to experience. And like, I see the benefit of leveraging things the other ways. So like, you work on something for like an hour that takes someone like a day to play.
Yeah, it's been a big thing for us too, like trying to save as much time to the developers as possible. And each bit of gameplay, like they introduce the idea of surgery and they introduce the idea of like electrocution. They just create loads of moments, right? Because that effort of a week of coding that is then months of potential variation. So yeah, I agree.
I worry about this though because this is
That's
one
a very
piece.
extreme example. Like
Well,
he
no,
went-
no,
he
it's
went completely crazy.
but
with
it's the
this.
system versus content-based games, and it's like in the consumer's mind, it's like what are we basically doing there? Is when you go and watch a movie, you pay $12 and that's fine. But when you pay and that's for a 2-hour experience. But when you actually go and play a system-based game, you can play it for almost infinity. Let's just say you took 120 hours, 160 hours, and you're like your expectation then is there's a cost associated with the playtime. And so it almost makes these experiences, content-based game experiences, it sets them up to fail because people are like, oh, well, that should be free when it takes like a crafting of years to get it right.
Completely. And there's another worse problem, which is that I think some games-based design can be very lazy, right? Like you're still trying to create a fantasy, you're still trying to create something that drives and guides a developer. What I'd love is to take the crafted feeling of a proper fantasy universe or like a proper storyline experience and then combine that with components around system-based experiences, but components are designed to give the game more depth and background, not to kind of pollute the core experience. That's something that we'd really love to like explore. I also think that online games have been such a scary bugbear to so many potentially fantastic developers just because of the crazy sunk costs and other stuff. I want to dispel that illusion and let those developers experiment with kick-ass stuff. So let's say this path continues. There's more and more emancipation for developers. There's more and more direct access to the community, and there's alternative funding channels that spring up that allow you to kind of really, you could do bigger productions, for example, but with the same kind of feel as the things that Double Fine makes right now. What do you think the gaming landscape then looks like? I mean, does it become like the music industry where you've got like Taylor Swift? And is Tim Schafer
how did we
Taylor
get
Swift?
from Broken Age to Taylor Swift? What was
Tim
there's got to be a
Schafer, Taylor
missing
Swift.
link.
Is Tim Schafer the next Taylor Swift in gaming? That's my question. Right? As a result of changing business production.
I mean, I think it is interesting because one thing we were talking about earlier about modders and indies and like how they get involved is the control aspect. And it's like with indies and with modders, you don't have that control. And that's one thing I'm excited to see, how it will happen, how it will evolve is with when you don't have that old model I was talking about in the music industry was all about control over the creators. And like if you decouple that and now you have access to money and it's without control and it's letting the creatives actually take that money. And before it's been like modders don't have money, indies don't have money, but now, studios like Tim has a label for this, like AAA. Is what he said.
That's cool.
Is these studios that exist between indies and AAA, which are like Double Fine, which have an existing consumer base.
Would you say that naturally, as a result of being Kickstarter originally funded and having the experience you guys did, that you represent a more efficient model of game development? Do you think your capital usage is more efficient than if you were a studio-funded company?
If you're in a studio and you have let's say you have a bunch of bands, your music studio, not all of them are going to be the Rolling Stones, and the Rolling Stones are going to pay for all the other bands, but you cross-collateralize so that, they all kind of pay for each other, which is great for you because you've taken the risk because you don't know which band's going to be a hit. And you've taken that risk and spread it out. And overall, you're going to make money because you have 100 bands signed. But if you're one of those individual bands, you're not going to make anything. And you're not going to keep any of your money because you're paying, even if you make a little bit of money, you're going to be paying for all the other bands. And you see these stories of occasionally a huge band getting rich. And so that kind of keeps the whole system going because like somebody's getting rich. Like it might as well, it's like a Vegas thing.
Yeah.
Could be me. When I pull that lever, it might be me. So I feel like that is inefficient, when you look at it from that side, because you're just trying to deal with risk, looking at it from a far enough back scale that it's not as scary, I guess. But in terms of you're one band or one game developer and you're going to make one game, you cut out that middleman who's just trying to mitigate their risk of their investment, and you get the money directly from the people who accept the risk. In that, Tim's announcing a new adventure game. He hasn't given the title. He hasn't told me anything about it. I don't know if he's still got it. Who knows what's going to happen. But I want this. I'm a high value consumer that knows what they want, and I'm going to put down $35 in advance. I could lose it all, but I'm going to put it down because either because I believe so much in that person or because I just want it to happen so bad. And they accept that risk, and I feel like it creates this really kind of like a bond that is financial, but it's also based on like kind of commitment and passion and all the right things.
I completely agree with that. And this is where I think technology is important too.
Tim, for you, since you've been in the gaming industry so long, like how has that evolved for you, like the technology platforms? Like what's the biggest, you're at the heart, you're a consummate storyteller. So I feel like for you, like that's the primary focus, but like how has that changed?
It's funny because like at the beginning, we're just starting a new project now because we shipped the last one, and I still go to this spiral notebook and start writing ideas down with a pen. It's like the process is exactly the same for me because it's like kind of it's more of a journey into your own mind and trying to find ideas but I think the biggest change besides the funding models changing is the relationship with the community and how social media has changed that. So they all have access to us in a way. Like when I was a kid, I didn't have any idea how I could get in contact with a guy, Nolan Bushnell, or like, I love my Atari so much, I don't know what to do with this. I can't go on Twitter and be like, Nolan,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
But nowadays you can go, people can tell me immediately, and trust me, they do, whether they like or don't like the game. Like the second it comes out, you'll hear from people of all the whole spectrum of how they felt about your game, and that's something you just have to really like. We have a full-time community manager to handle that, because that could be a great, powerful part of the whole deal, and it could be very dangerous if you don't treat them well and be honest with them and pay attention to them. Sometimes you'll have the angriest person in the world write you a meanest letter, and then you'll just say, oh, I'm sorry you had that issue. Let me try and get that in our bug tracking system. And they're like, I can't believe you answered. They're so happy that you just listened to them. So just like listening to them and interacting with them. And it is definitely a new thing compared to how it was back in the 90s.
So that's the biggest change for you.
Completely. And I guess now more and more, I guess the technology side would be developers can do something about it. Even for online games, right? You can make changes, you can modify stuff. Like there were some people on World's Drift Bosses game, and it's all about systems and physics, but then they had a really samey resource model where like you were actually going up to a tree or a rock and extracting resources. And people like flamed them, right? They were like, you built a physics game where you're meant to be able to interact with the world and you have this technology, like why can't you do it? Like a week later, they posted a video of people dynamiting rocks and blowing them up and chopping down physicalized trees. But to be able to do something about it in a week, it feeds that cycle of community members who, and the guy who posted the thing, he's like the most, he's a super fan now, right? Like he posts every week, right? Because he's like, wow, I had that interaction. And this is, again, where I think that Taylor Swift analogy is less ridiculous, right? Like direct fan contact, direct fan responses, that's something that's now possible, never was before.
Great, you guys. Thank you. Great, you guys. Thank you.